Okay, I think we can begin. Good evening, good afternoon, half a day, Tiro. Um, Hello, hola, everybody that is connecting with us today from the different corners of the world. Um, my name is Adi Martinez Roman, and I am the co-director of Right to Democracy. Right to Democracy, for those that do not know us, is an organization that is building a movement to promote democracy, equity, and self-determination in our territories. And part of this fabulous work that I have been privileged to undertake in the past 2 years has been promoting conversations, building an ecosystem of people across the territories and in the diaspora in the US and allies to be able to work together to confront colonial rule in our territories. And to promote these conversations and the intersections, these virtual dialogues have been an essential part of moments that we come together and explore across territories specific issues. Today, I'm very privileged to be with 5 women leaders to talk about family, youth, and gender violence in our territories. And basically, we want to hear more about their work, the challenges they're facing, and the challenges that are facing the territories, and explore a little bit with them the intersections that violence has with colonial rule, talking about their visions for a future, and even, we never know, opening possibilities for collaboration. We are today with 5 amazing leaders from the different territories. And I'm going to introduce very short each one, and I'm going to let them speak a little bit about themselves and the territories. First, we start with American Samoa. So we have from American Samoa, Jennifer Tofaeono, Executive Director of the American Samoa Alliance Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. She was born in Los Angeles, California, but she's raised in American Samoa. And she has built a career in healthcare, finance before transitioning to advocacy work. In late 2016, she joined the American Samoa Alliance Against Domestic and Sexual Violence as a consultant and became executive director in 2018. Under her leadership, the organization has grown significantly, expanding 4 staff to over 12 and increasing the funding from $500,000 to $1.2 million. Ms. Tofaeono's vision is rooted in community resilience and cultural strength. Jennifer, do you want to say hi to the public and tell me a little bit about you and American Samoa?
So talofa to everybody, that means hello in our language. So it's very interesting. The alliance came to be in about 2000, after one of the biggest hurricanes or typhoons that happened to American Samoa in 2009. So there was a lot of flooding, there was a lot of violence that happened. And so the leader at that time got the group together and started working in domestic violence spaces. And so Maisie's aware of our previous person. They've had a strong connection. We continue to build on that with Saipan as a coalition. So as the dual coalition, we are federally recognized by FIPSA to be the educators and the providers of education and community building on domestic and sexual violence. But as a result of that, we've grown into other spaces. We've done rape prevention education, we're doing rural, we're doing for our Fafafian community. So we're expanding on our services. So I'm grateful to be here in this space, and I'm happy to share what we're doing here in American Samoa, and as well as to learn from all the other panelists here. Thank you, Ari.
Thank you, Jennifer. Can you tell us something particular that you love the most about your territory?
Oh, our people are amazing. They are definitely filled in love. They are very open to those who come to visit. But the flip side too is that we also have very high standards, and as a result, we are very in the manner of our traditions. So we always like for other people, we are very inviting, but we also want to ensure that our traditions are honored and respected when you come to our island.
That's awesome, Jennifer. Thanks for sharing.
Thank
So next on the list, I have Maisie Tenorio. Maisie Tenorio is a proud Chamorro woman from Saipan, Northern Mariana Islands, with deep love for her community and believes in gender equity and social justice fuels her commitment to ending domestic violence and sexual assault in the Northern Mariana Islands and throughout the Pacific region. She is founding member of the Northern Marianas Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence and served as its board chair for 2 years prior to becoming the executive director in 2009. Having over 20 years of experience in direct services and advocacy, she works to create the Northern Mariana Islands that thrives in safety, respect, and love. Maisie, could you say hi to our public and tell me a little bit about Saipan?
Sure, half a day. Ditto, everyone. Thank you so much, Addie, and everyone else for welcoming all of us, me representing my people and my community to this wonderful conversation. I have had the honor of visiting all of the territories that are here on this webinar, and it's always such a wonderful space for me to be with other sisters who are doing phenomenal work in their community. You know, all of us doing what we can for the love of our community, and it always makes me feel so good to be with sisters who are doing the same work. So thank you so much for having me. As you said, I work for the coalition. It is probably one of the most wonderful things that I have accomplished in my life is to be able to serve my community in this way. I do want to recognize all of my amazing coworkers who are here on the webinar. So thank you guys all for being here with me. The coalition is founded in the belief that we can end domestic violence and sexual assault within our community, that the people who live and raise their families and generations to come deserve safety and peace. And that starts with every single one of us doing what we can and working together. You know, there is a value of being an islander, and many of that is rooted in respect. So we really try to put forth, you know, the values of our ancestors in the work that we do. So again, I'm just so happy to be here and excited to hear the conversation.
Thank you. Maisie, can you tell us a little bit something that you love about Saipan and the Northern Marianas
Oh my
that you
gosh,
can share with the others?
everything. The
Every
people, the beaches, the sunsets, and I think we all might argue that we have the best sunsets. Our islands have the best sunsets, but I think ours is pretty wonderful, and I hope that you guys all can come and visit and watch. But there is this strong sense of community on our islands. And so the Northern Marianas is 14 islands. We are part of the Mariana Archipelago, and it's 15 islands with Guam also. But the northern 14 islands make up the Northern Mariana Islands. So it's a wonderful
Thank
place
you.
to live and work. And so I invite you all to come and visit one day.
Thank you so much. Yes, it is wonderful. I've been there as well as all the territories. Um, and I have to say really fast, there's a different shade of blue in all of the territories in the city. It's beautiful. So the next one is my compatriot, Borinqueña, Stephanie Figueroa. Stephanie is a woman, mother, and a Puerto Rican professional focused on the development and implementation of programs and services for vulnerable populations, especially female heads of household, survivors of violence, and entrepreneurs. She has worked in the Senate of Puerto Rico, the Department of Family, and as a professor at the Inter-American University. And she directed the Center of Support of Victims of Crime. She was also Director of Programs and Services at the CPPR and is currently Executive Director of the Gender Equity Observatory, El Observatorio de Equidad de Género. She has been a workshop facilitator, speaker, and has written for newspapers and gender violence. Stephanie, can you say hi to the public, please?
Hello, Adi. Hola a todos los que nos escuchan. Thank you so much for inviting me in this conversation. I'm truly honored to be here with this amazing woman and doing amazing work in their territories. And I'm truly honored to share a bit about what's happening in Puerto Rico and what drives us every single day at the Gender Equity Observatory. The Observatory is a nonprofit organization established by a coalition of feminist and human rights organizations in Puerto Rico that were very concerned about the increase in gender-based violence after the hits of Hurricane Irma and Maria in September 2017, and mostly the lack response in terms of services, follow-up, and statistics from the government agencies. Our mission is to monitor and analyze the condition with women, girls, and LGBTQ plus people live in Puerto Rico, generate data, make public policy recommendation, and oversee the state response to address gender-based violence and inequities in our country. So our approach is focused in four pillars: monitoring, research, education, and alliance. We are a small team. I want to recognize our analyst, Dr. Deborah Upeira, is connected and is one of the pioneers of this amazing project. We are very happy to be here and to answer the question, what I love most about my country. I think that the love of for the people. But mostly, I love the force that we can produce when we come together and fight for something that we believe. And other thing that I love about my country is the commitment of the nonprofit organizations that work with women and domestic violence survivors. So I'm very happy to be here.
Gracias, Jennifer. So I moved to our neighbors, beautiful Virgin Islands. And from the Virgin Islands, we are honored to have Shalene Gomes. She is born in London and raised across the world with strong roots in St. Kitts and St. Croix. And she is the director of crisis intervention at the Women's Coalition of St. Croix, where has served for over 25 years. With a background in communication, psychology, theology, and public health, her work centers on building healthy, empowered communities. She is the founder and mentor of the Caribbean Mentorship Program spanning 37 islands and countries, and is also a life coach, business consultant, caregiver support facilitator, and domestic sexual violence support group leader. A passionate activist, Shalene works locally and globally to combat gun violence, human trafficking, and violence against women and children. Shalene, welcome. Please say hi to our wonderful audience.
Sorry about that.
There you
Thank
go.
you so much for having me. I appreciate the invitation to be in the presence of such amazing people doing such amazing work, bounded by the fact that we are all common territories. And so I am the Director of Crisis Intervention at the Women's Coalition of St. Croix. Our organization is a nonprofit that is the domestic violence, sexual assault, and victims of crime. We were founded in 1981, so we're 43 years old. We're old, but we've been progressing since then. Our operation is in the Virgin Islands. We're based on St. Croix, with sister islands, having partnerships with Family Resource Center that covers the St. Thomas, St. John's, and Water Island District. Our program is broken down into our transitional housing and shelter, as well as a thrift store. We had an education program as well, that we have been using, and we have been working to make sure that we ensure that legislation gets done, put in. And so we testify in the legislature and on the Senate floor very often, because they don't really know what's going on. And so we need to inform them. And so we make sure that we advocate for the people that we give services to. And the thing about our islands that I like is that we have a very unique history. We had a fire burn in 1878, which is when we first started fighting colonialism and how it worked. We had 4 women burn down the entire island to make sure that we got equal rights and equal pay. And so that's one of the things that I love about our island. Even though we do have that rebellion, we have that strong sense of pride. And that sense of pride makes us very, very compassionate about the things that we do and the way we look after our people. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, Shalene. Now back to the Pacific. We have Jayne Flores from Guam. Jayne has served as director of the Bureau of Women Affairs since January 2019. And now is the director of the Guam Bureau of Women Affairs, the BWA. The BWA addresses issues pertinent to women, minorities, and marginalized members of the community. Flores has instituted programs to address period poverty and sexual assault, to encourage women who drop out of high school to earn their high school diploma, and is currently working on a doula program to address Guam's high maternal and infant mortality rates. Jayne, are you able to say hi to our public right now?
Oh, good. Yes, I am.
Okay, good.
Half a day, everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It is such an honor to be in the presence of my sister territories, and half a day to Maisie and Saipan, which is we are the southernmost island in the Mariana Islands archipelago. So I want to say half a day, especially to our neighbor up north, and half a day to Virgin Islands. I was there when I was very young. Such a beautiful place, and hopefully I would like to get to Puerto Rico and American Samoa someday. But to talk about what the Bureau of Women's Affairs does, I am very proud to say that the Bureau of Women's Affairs was created in 1991 here on Guam through legislation, but it was dormant for many years before our first female governor, Governor Lulian Guerrero, was elected in 2018, and she asked me to revive the agency, which had nothing. We started with nothing. We had no office, no records, no anything. And I'm very happy to say that I now have a staff of 4, 1 locally funded person and 3 federally funded persons. We bring in several $1 million a year in grants to fund the efforts to provide services to sexual assault and domestic violence and human trafficking survivors. And we also have instituted, as you pointed out, Ari, some local programs to help women on Guam. And we are focusing here on especially our youth that are affected, because we have very high rates of criminal sexual conduct against minors on the island. So we're really trying to focus on that aspect. We work very closely with our coalition against sexual assault and family violence. It's a dual coalition. So we work very closely with them to facilitate and to make sure that we have services for people and that the providers and the advocates get paid. And we are very happy to be here today. Thank you so much. And to answer your question about what I love most about Guam, I want to, full disclosure here, I am not a native of Guam. I was born and raised in Illinois, and in 1984, I came out here as a reporter. My background is journalism. I've written extensively about domestic violence and sexual assault, and I took a scuba class in 1984, and my Chamorro scuba instructor was so wonderful that I married him. And so I've been here for 41 years, and my husband is Chamorro, my children and my grandchildren are Chamorro. So I am so fully vested in this island, and the people and the culture are so warm and welcoming and wonderful. And we have the most, and what they say about the islands, and I'm sure all of you know this, is our oceans are such an amazing color of sapphire. And the whole aspect of climate change and the effect of climate change on women and as victims, of climate change and what it does to all of us and our children is so important. And so I'm so especially grateful to be in this space today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jayne. Thank you. And I'm glad that you were able to introduce yourself. So let's start. Everybody had a chance to talk a little bit about what you did, about your territory. And we want to start talking more about violence in your territories, like the challenges that you can share with the public that you're facing in each one of your homes, in violence in families, youth, and gender, and talk about how you try to address that through your work. And let me just start with American Samoa. Jennifer, can you share a little bit with us?
When thank you so much for the question. I just, it's such a complex question about the challenges in our territory and the violence that we have, that it has to go all the way from the beginning, right? I mean, particularly when what we have recorded. And we were always warriors in the Pacific. We're fighting against each other, and we fight in our families and our chiefs and our villages. We've always had that, but there's always been a huge love and respect within families, and that's been our strength. And then when Christianity came in the 1830s, we had to subscribe to what they provided, right? Which was having the missionaries come in and then creating their spaces of dominance between the pastors and the books and the way that religion is set. And we embraced it. I'm not speaking ill about it, but what I want to do is say that when they introduced us to all of these sets of rules, it became wrapped into our communal settings, into our fabric of the way we live. So what the missionaries did was they take the traditional Samoan system of leadership, of what's known in our Matai systems, and they attached it to like what Jesus does. So for the Faifeau and they became Faifeau means to do the work, and that's what we call our pastors. And they became aligned with, they were given as much power as the Matai. So even the way that which is the high chief. So when we relay the story of a Matai, Jesus is considered the Matai. And so they were able to make sure that that religious part was aligned with our cultural beliefs and patterns, making it even stronger in our setting. So we embraced it. So unfortunately, we also embraced the negative punishment side of it, the separation of the women and the men in the settings, all those things that lead to dominance, right? These activities and these spaces that create power in different settings. So the service and the leadership of the Matai system, which emphasizes family and love, was in alignment to the pastor part of it, but the dominance and the power taking has been what has become much more negative in our community, I would say. So you'll see it that men are much more, they have much higher spaces. There are a lot of spaces in our community where there are just men Matais, that women are not able to sit in those spaces. There's very few women Matais that are of higher dominance, that are paramount chiefs. You will not, it's very, very difficult to find that. And so when you're not in those spaces, that's also how our legislative spaces are developed. They were able to create a system that had a House and a Senate and a representative, but the Senate seats are all determined by familial ties, who the chiefs are in which village and who gets to be a senator. There are not very many women senators, right? So in the House, the legislative part, it's voted by the village. So that in that space, so they try to do this way of creating, allowing for our custom, and then allowing for our the way that we can vote people in. Unfortunately, though, because these spaces are dominated by men, the idea of having women in these spaces and making much more acceptance, and it's really, you can see the issue with that in our community, that sometimes when women are not allowed to speak in those spaces, and they're relegated to sitting in the back, it really, you can see that in our community.
Mhm. So that is a way that culture, local indigenous culture that has evolved during, right, the years that we have had relationships with different powers and different countries, how culture evolves and it interacts, right? I will come back to you, Jennifer, but I want to give a chance maybe to Shalene to talk a little bit about the work, the challenges that are faced in the Virgin Islands with violence and how they work to tackle it.
I think we have pretty much the same issue. Ours is compounded because the Virgin Islands had 7 flags, right? So in terms of 7 owners, right? We were owned by quite a number of people, and all of those cultural norms and colonial norms and all their beliefs played in. And so we will find that even though we are now owned by the US, we were run by Spain and England and the Netherlands and France and the Knights of Malta and Denmark before we were owned by the US. And so our streets have Danish names. Some of our streets have Spanish names. We have different architecture from different places. And so when you bring in our Taino culture, which is the natives that were there initially, now all of a sudden we have a conflict. The things that we hold sacred in terms of the land, like most other people, our cultures, coming in from African descent, bringing our African culture, our African religions, our spiritualism, and how that plays into how it becomes a conflict in how we want to deal with conflict, how we want to deal with issues, how we want to deal with violence, and how we're allowed to deal with violence. Disclaimer for the criminal justice people, the lawyers, the criminal justice system isn't really based on the victims. It's based on the criminals, right? And I'm an advocate, so I'm going to say that the criminal justice system does not look at it, and that increases the violence that we have. Because if I'm the one in pain, I don't have a say, because I'm the witness in the case, it's going to increase it, because then my fear of how the situation and how the system is set up, to racism, the economic development, all of those things that come into play continues to create more of a challenge for us, because people are afraid to do anything because they're not getting the results that they want to. And then culturally, because we, like all the territories, have this input of what punishment should look like from the slave trade, we start to use it as what we think is a cultural norm, because it's a learned behavior. It's a forced learned behavior and mind frame. So whereas we need to be abusing each other, we now abuse people, because abuse was the tool that was used to create control. And the control is what power and abuse is. That's where we get domestic violence. That's where we get child abuse. That's where we get human trafficking. That's where we get all of that. And so we're tackling that by trying to change the mindset of the victims that we have and our community on a whole, through our outreach programs, our education programs, and through partnering with other nonprofits that are there that may not be doing victim advocacy, because we are the only victim advocacy agency. Well, we're the oldest victim advocacy agency on island. And helping the Senate, the people in power, the people who think they're in power, I should say, because they have the systematic power, not necessarily the true power, because the true power comes from the people. And to encourage the people to understand that they do have this power and that they can use their voice. And we tackle that with the radio program that we have, and we do it monthly, right? Because if we can spread the information out and have people have an input, then they find their voice back. We want our community to get their voice back, so that we're not the only ones talking.
That's awesome, Shalene. And I see, and I think it's wonderful. I see everybody going like this, like our heads bobbing, because it's like a lot of agreement and a lot of like similitudes. I forgot the word in English.
Similarities.
Similarities. Thank you, Shalene. Similarities. And let me pass the word to Maisie, that was nodding. Is it is it like parallel, and what is the work that you do in Saipan?
Very much so. I think, like Jennifer was saying, when I read the question, I thought, wow, this is such a complex thing to answer because it's so multifaceted. There's so many layers that we are talking about. Everything that Shalene said, I really also felt, especially when she talked about the criminal justice system and how that was created.
Morning.
Right? There are so many external things that we have to exist and live in. And so when we are fighting for victims and survivors, we are working with these external systems, right, that are not necessarily in tune to the indigenous way of life for that community, because they are not created by us and for us. They are created for another culture, another set of people, yet we have to sort of deal with it. And oftentimes our survivors don't access those systems because they are not made for them. And it feels oftentimes this re-victimizing or re-traumatizing. So when I was thinking about the question, to me, I thought, like Jennifer said, it's such a long history of challenges. And if I think about my community now, sort of post-COVID, post two major super typhoons, one of which at the time was the largest to ever hit US soil, right? Thinking about that, we are still recovering and healing from occupation, and then putting all of these things on top of that, and then adding all of the issues, right? Substance use disorder, disabilities, language access, the issues with, inclusion of LGBTQA plus people in our community. And it sort of broke my heart because when you are a survivor or somebody who's experiencing domestic violence and sexual assault, all of those issues are just magnified for you. And so it makes our work, all of our work, so critical and so urgent. One of the things that we have been seeing recently with regard to challenges is this really high level of need for like basic stuff, shelter, food, transportation. And so victims and survivors are not necessarily trying to think about accessing the criminal justice system or even counseling or even advocacy, because what they're thinking about is food, shelter, transportation, school, work, just the basic things that we have. And then we're also seeing a shift, I think, in the type of victimization with the increased use of technology, and with still the communities trying to figure out, trying to learn how to support survivors more. So when we're talking about sexual abuse in the CNMI, a lot of it is minor victims. And what we're also seeing is that many of the perpetrators are close family members. So we're really dealing with also those barriers and working with families to hold offenders accountable, because again, they're not really accessing the system. So how can we as a community do the accountability, do what we can to support survivors and hold offenders accountable? But that's just a few of the things, but I hope it makes sense.
You did make sense, and there's a lot of parallelisms between you. And I wanted to come back to the Caribbean, and hear from Stephanie. Because the particularity of Puerto Rico being the Spanish speaking place that we are and everything. Does this sound familiar, and what do you want to add to this question?
Yes, definitely. Unfortunately, you probably know the headlines by now, but when we hear them out loud, the way it really hits and the numbers themselves speak to an emergency in human rights. In 2024, the Observatory documented 81 women were victims to direct and indirect feminicide, and that's an average of one victim every 4.5 days. and that's really concerning and heartbreaking reality. Mundo Sur, that is a nonprofit organization based in Argentina that tracks feminicide across Latin America and the Caribbean, has ranked Puerto Rico second in the region with most feminicide per capita. These underline the crisis of our island faces and show we still lack the comprehensive preventive policies needed to stop violence. Between 2019 to the mid 2025, our island lost 445 lives to gender-based violence. That represents a 22% rise since 2019. And also, we have a very serious problem with the access of firearms. Firearms in Puerto Rico has become the weapon of choice. Intimate partner feminicides carried out with guns leaped to 33% during 2014 to 2019, to 75% in 2024, and 90% in 2025. So this represents a big problem right now here in Puerto Rico. Also, between 2021 and 2025, we recorded 323 attempts of feminicides, and most of them involving firearms. And the Observatory has also documented 40 women and girls still missing. 28% were under 18 years old at the time of their disappearance. And unfortunately, many of them were in the custody of the Department of Family when they disappeared. So we question the work of the department to protect and secure these young girls. In 2024, 40 of those victims of feminicide were mothers, leaving 86 children and 44 minors without their protection. And tragically, 9% of these feminicides unfold in front of their own kids. So we know the level of trauma that causes experience the violent death of your mother in front of your eyes. And we don't have a public policy that guarantee the reparation and services after a tragic event like that. And add to that, 53% of the cases, the perpetrator died by suicide. So these statistics trace not just lost life, but shattered households, communities, and we know that provoke wounds that may never fully heal. And beyond these alarming facts, Puerto Rico also grappling with a deepening poverty. Nearly of half of female-head households live below the poverty line, with a little bit access to safe housing, like the other panelist says, healthcare, and mostly migrant women that face even steeper barriers under the restrictive policies that we are confronting right now. And the territory still lack of coherent public policy for protection, reparation, but most importantly, prevention. The government has failed to effectively prevent gender-based violence in all its forms, and that's when the observatory stepped in. We firmly believe that transparent data empowers citizens to understand the realities that they live. So since 2020, our real-time observatory has documented every feminicide, attempt of feminicide, disappearance, and also we are active members of the Red Latinoamericana contra la Violencia de Género. And this network elevates Puerto Rico crisis on the international stage. So that's really important to us too. And lastly, we turn data into dialogue. We believe that data is power, and we're constantly in the media, giving interviews, writing up ends, hosting press briefing. So we translate our findings into a clear, transparent reality, and to join shaping real solutions with the citizens. So that's a little bit of what we are experiencing, but right now we are very worried about the rise in feminicides in Puerto Rico and the lack of response of the government and lack of prioritizing this matter.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And it's really wonderful that people can see how this panel is different territories, but also different types of organizations that join. And that even that you're still agreeing on similarities that we have across. And Stephanie comes from Observatorio, a private data driven, like information gathering transparency body. We have crisis managers like Shalene and other types. And now we go to Jayne. And Jayne is actually from the Bureau of Guam. So in Guam, and Jayne, can you talk a little bit about if you identify or if you want to add more about what the challenges are in Guam and what is the work that you do from the governmental side in Guam? Oh, you're on mute, Jayne. You're on mute.
I apologize. I always forget that. Like the other territory, we are colonization, and we were colonized by the Spanish for 300 years and then became an American territory in 1898 as a spoil of the Spanish-American War. And then we were occupied by the Japanese for 2.5 years during World War II. And then the Americans came in and they're if you talk to the elders, the elder Chamorros, the Americans saved the Chamorros from the Japanese. But if you talk to the younger generation, it's recolonization, which things that has contributed the most to domestic violence and sexual assault and human trafficking and all of the things that we are seeing with regard to victimization here is the influx of alcohol and drugs. And these are not indigenous things. The Chamorros have tuba, which is a fermented a coconut drink, and that was the only alcoholic drink on the island for centuries. And then, the influx of the Americanization, drugs, alcohol, that has contributed so much to our domestic violence and our all of our issues. But also, with regard to the Chamorro culture, we are a matrilineal culture, and that was suppressed with colonization. It was more of the male dominance, and so that is something that has also taken hold with regard to what we're seeing in domestic violence and sexual assault situations, where you don't reveal your perpetrator because they are a family member, and we keep these things silent, and we don't talk about them because we're afraid that if the perpetrator is the breadwinner, then what will happen to us. And so with our work with the advocates and the agencies, we work with governmental agencies and nonprofit organizations to help get services to victims and help victims know that if you do turn in your perpetrator, there is help for you. There is housing. We can help you with housing. We can help you to find a job. We can help you to get money for food and things like that. So those are the things that my office tries to do, is help the agencies that do all of this work with funding and with awareness and education.
That's awesome, Jayne. Thank you for your perspective and bringing this more explicit intersection of culture, colonialism. And I want to give a chance to Jennifer if she wants to add a little bit to her previous answer on what they working in the alliance in American Samoa, how it intersects. And I'm going to do something because we are already at 6:47. I want to also, I'm going to unite to that, also your vision to the future. So just this opportunity to share with us a little bit more about what is the work that you're doing, Jennifer, because you didn't get a chance to elaborate that much on that. And and also about your vision to the future of the work that you do in American Samoa.
Thank you. I think definitely I just want to say one more thing about the colonial property, because we definitely we all come across that. What has been something that I've always had an issue in having these conversations, because we have to take this westernized thought and then put it to a package that is Pacific Islander and into our language, right? And since most of our language and most of our belief systems and things like that were created by the missionaries, and the way that we look at the way that we're supposed to treat each other is based on the Bible, we still come back to that colonial part of them having control, and that then becoming what leads the way we engage each other, right? So having these spaces where men then now are the dominants, whereas before our goddess of war, our god of war is a woman, not Fanua. So these things that were in our cultural practices and our belief systems, the stories that we have about what was important has changed over time. A lot of that because of 1830s when the missionaries came in. So that has had a big impact on the way that our men do treat our women. So that's really important to understand. And so we do have that. So in moving the work forward is definitely trying to integrate that process and that understanding of what causes violence. What is violence to us? What does it look like to us in the way of a cultural pattern or a cultural framework, right? When we have our young men who have beaten their women and have lit his wife on fire, it's like really important to explain, well, why did he feel that way when that's not what our community and what the Samoan love is about? The love of family, the love of wife, the love of children. What is it that made him feel that that was okay? Well, it's the dominance part, right? So those are those things that we're trying to take down component by component by introducing these difficult conversations. And they are extremely difficult, even though it's 250 years later, but they've had 250 years to be woven and become a very harsh pattern, a really strong hold in the fabric that we have become. The love of our people, and the love of our strengths of the culture, the community, the love of our families. Well, it changes when we feel that there's dominance, when we can say, when I am the father that can tell you, you cannot do that, and I can beat you as a result of that. And those are the things that we're trying to unpack, is the ability to say, let's talk about conversations. Let's talk about access to other safe relationships, safe conversations that have not been in the conversations or part of the solution for many, many years. So we're now trying to shift that and pivot and introduce that into a community where they've had 250 years to think no, or 200 years, I'm sorry, to think no, this dominant system that the male is always right and they are the leader of our families, when that wasn't always the case. So moving it forward has been, my team does a great job. We have a really good training. She's excellent in the way that she can take the cultural framework and then put it into a much more, I would say, American English type of framework, so that this way we give them the traditional knowledge as to why we should change behavior and change process of thinking, so that we can create safe spaces. We're really trying to ensure that we're putting resilience and wellness into many, many of our conversations, and the importance of that, because we have limited funding for specialists that can do psychologists. We have maybe 1 or 2 on island in a population of 53,000. So our service providers are very limited here in American Samoa, and I'm sure a lot of the territories have that same issue. But when it's in your home, it just is more magnified, right? So we really are trying to change mind belief systems, or belief systems that still are done within a Samoa respectful manner, so that they can accept it and that we can see change. We have seen change in the discussions that we're having, which I think is because we've been doing it for the last 10 years. And it's taking time, but we've got a long ways to go.
definitely education, dialogue, and having those earnest conversations in safe spaces are so important. Even for right to democracy, that we're not dealing directly with violence. We're just dealing with trying to promote democracy, equity, and self-determination in the territories. Having to integrate is an essential part of the
Yeah.
work that you have to do in order to promote the agency of the people that we're serving. So definitely trailblazers in that way. I want to give yes, Jennifer, you want to say
Just
something?
wanted to, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to say one more thing that I neglected, which is really, really huge in our part. It's the Fa'afafine community that we're bringing with us. I mean, this is something that is huge in our community. The Fa'afafine community is, we have Fa'afafine who are male at birth, but they practice in the way of women. They're not they're not LGBTQ. They have a stand on their own. That's our indigenous part, right? I know that other communities have that. We definitely have our Fa'afafine community. We were funded for the first time to do Office of Violence Against Women, from Office of Violence Against Women, for a rural project with our Fa'afafine community, which I am ecstatic and so proud of, that we've been able to do that, because we're bringing another vulnerable, marginalized community to the table in our space, which was never ever done. So that is in a movement of change, is bringing more people to the table. And so I just wanted to say that that's the way that we're also changing, is to make sure that we're bringing more to the table.
I'm so grateful that you brought that up, because I was anyway going to say hi to Jaya, the director of the Fa'afafine Rural Program. I know she is in the public, and I've learned so much from Jaya, and she was able to come to our summit in Puerto Rico. And Fa'afafine, for the public, the attendees, Fa'afafine means in the way of a woman. And you also have Fa'atane, which is in the way of a man. So, like for us, that would be more similar to the concept of trans, right? But like Jennifer says, it's a very cultural, indigenous concept that actually in their culture they're very much accepted as persons, and they have a very important role in their society, but also suffering from violence and all these challenges that we have talked about. But Jaya, love you. Thank you for being here. I also have from the Cross Territorial Coalition, because she's in the Cross Territorial Coalition. I also have Frances, Auntie Frances from the NMI. She's here. Hi. And I think I also have other people that haven't said hi in the chat, but I see Sarah Nenedog from Guam, and Jalanis is here with us too. So hi everybody from the Cross Territorial Coalition that is joining us. Also, please feel free to put questions on the chat or in the Q&A. We're going to finish this last round with the last four speakers, and then go into questions. So I wanted to move to Shalene from Virgin Islands. Can you speak more, Shalene, about the intersection, if you want to add some comments on that, between violence and colonialism? But if you want to also please tell a little bit about your visions for the future, kind of like to close your presentation.
Okay, thank you. The cross, the intersection between colonialism, and I'm gonna, be the advocate. One of the biggest problems that we have, really and truly, is Western media. A lot of the things that are impacting the way our people, especially in the US Virgin Islands, are operating, we're seeing a lot of our crimes that are mimicking what they see on television. We're seeing a lot of the mindsets that they have, especially in the youth. Like everybody lives on Instagram, social media, TikTok. That is becoming the new definition of who they need to be and who they want to be. And so we're having a problem with people losing themselves as a person, right? And because they're feeding into what they see and that is becoming their reality, then the violence is also becoming their reality because they're seeing these things. And so they're thinking that this is the way it's supposed to be. So even in our trying to combat it, we have to remind our people, especially our young people, that television is television. We don't, it doesn't need to be our reality. We don't make guns in the Virgin Islands, but like else was saying, we have a problem with guns. We had a 14-year-old that shot somebody on the boardwalk at 12 o'clock in the day 2 weeks ago, right? So, these things that are happening, that is becoming a direct result of what they're seeing and what has started to become what they think is the norm, us not being able to get to as many people, us also dealing with emotional stagnation and community grooming, where we believe that silence still is part of our culture because it was our culture during the slavery. You're afraid of losing your child if you talk or you have a reaction. And so because of that, there's no more talking, right? It passes down. We have old sayings in our community where what happens in the house stays in the house. So when somebody is raped, they just tell you, don't go down the street to that person's house, but they're not telling you why. And then you end up down there for some reason or the other. You get molested and there is incest and there is rape and there is domestic violence, and then nobody backs you up. The criminal justice system, because it's not based on the victim, it's based on the criminals. Then we have the community that no longer feels safe talking about this because, one, culturally, we've been trained to be silent. And so having a voice becomes difficult. Being able to be outspoken about the things that hurt becomes difficult. And then put the social media on top of it, where everybody is supposed to look good and they don't really care if you don't. And so you're supposed to look okay and be okay. And that incorporates the violence, right? Because now what you look like does become the definition of who you are instead of the person, the culture, the cultural norms that we had prior to the colonialism. That becomes what we start to perpetrate now. And so that's what we're combating. And so in our vision for the future, we're looking at trying to reframe the mindset, right? Create a new narrative. So we have programs and we're partnering with other people who are starting to create social media that becomes culturally appropriate. So that now becomes the norm. We're having conversations from preschool all the way up as to what is healthy, what is the definition of self, what is the definition of what family should be, how do you keep your voice, how do you maintain who you are, how do you learn your boundaries, how do we not have involuntary prostitution, because, and I'll explain involuntary prostitution so that doesn't sound so weird, right? But we were trained that if you're going to be a good woman, you have to allow a man to buy you stuff, right? And if they buy you stuff, then you get sex, right? That sex is the payment. And because sex has become the payment, now they associate having sex with getting money. You understand? So that turns into a different thing altogether. And so we have to combat that because it devalues it devalues the woman, it devalues the girl. It creates a different perspective in the boys. And so we partner also with the men's coalition because if we don't get our men on the right track, we're going to be lost. If they keep the mind frame that they have, that they should be dominant because that's what democracy is a definitional thing that we do need to look into as well, because that in itself as a word comes from a male dominant society, because that's how it was created initially. They didn't take into consideration neither blacks nor women in that definition when we were talking about democracy. So even how we redefine things and what it's supposed to mean based on what was stated and not what has been perpetrated is something that we're working for. Our vision really is to work ourselves out of a job because we would like domestic violence and sexual assault to be done. But in the process, we will continue to do education, do financial management, because our cultural and emotional relationship with pain, with money, with self sufficiency, with value is something that we really have to work on. And so that is where we're going with it.
That's great, Shalene. And you touch upon so many of the themes in such an efficient way. Thank you. And I see that I have Stephanie with the hand up and Jayne with the hand up. Is it that you want to go next or you have a question for your colleagues? Oh, okay. So Stephanie doesn't have a hand up on purpose. Okay. And Jayne, do you have a hands up on purpose?
Yes, I just wanted to say
Okay.
that I so agree with Shalene over in the Virgin Islands about social media being a big problem and being the Western social media being such a huge problem and influence with regard to violence. It is amazing. My 7-year-old grandson is obsessed with WWE, the wrestling. I mean, it's just, I didn't realize that this is the audience that they have moved to now. They have moved to this young male audience. And his mother, my daughter, and I trying to tell him that, sweetheart, this is not real. These people are acting. And he goes, yes, Grandma, they're real people. And I said, sweetheart, I know they're real people, but they're not really hurting each other. You can't really do this in real life because you're going to hurt somebody. They're acting, they practice these moves, but these kids don't understand that. And they, we have young men going into clubs and, having contests of beating people up just because they can. And it is pervasive, and it's this social media culture that they think that this is real or this is how you're supposed to be, and it's a huge problem. And I know that Sarah Netadog, thank you for joining, Sarah, put in the chat about a question about the increase of women in jails and prisons, and what we know about violence. And I do know that in our recovery, we have a new recovery program. It's a residential recovery program for women, and every single one of them who is in this program is in a substance abuse recovery program because they were sexually assaulted when they were young, and that contributed to their substance abuse issues. And so we are seeing a lot of that as well. And this is, again, the social media violence, the violence against women that is perpetrated, that this is okay, that this is normal. So it is a huge problem. So Shalene, thank you for saying that, because it's so true.
Jayne, would you just share with us then, as a closing of your presentation, what is the vision that you have for the future? Because you really touched upon the intersection with colonialism and wanted to hear more about looking forward. What do you see your work going?
Well, our work here with the Bureau of Women's Affairs is working with the coalition and with all of our nonprofits. We have victims advocates reaching out. We have a visitation center, all of these to empower women and people and young people and make them aware that uh, what they're seeing on social media is not what is real. I have 2 young interns from our Department of Youth Affairs in my program with Bureau of Women's Affairs, and their assignment from me is to do a public service announcement about sexting, about the fact that sexting is illegal and you shouldn't do it. You should not be taking pictures of yourself and sharing them on social media, because when you break up with your boyfriend, if he shares them with everybody, well, not only is it a crime, but it's never going to go away. And also to empower them and share that sexual assault, just because I dress a certain way or because I get drunk, doesn't mean that the men in my life have an excuse to sexually assault me. So we're dealing with it that way. I think more awareness, more education is key for everyone.
And of course, more resources
Yeah,
to do
well,
that in
yes,
a time where resources are scarce,
yes.
right? So I
That's always the issue. But what I have found, and what I would like to share with my sisters, is that we can also leverage resources. Like, we have a television station on Guam, and if I buy some ads on the television station, I can ask them to take those ads and put them as part of their care force then, where they do public service announcements. So you can do that. You know, a little bit of money can go a long way to, for lack of a better term, guilting, you know, the media into helping. Do you want to help? You know, this is part of your community. You will look better if you help us to spread the word about this, that type of thing. So
Thank you so much.
awareness and education is.
Thank you so much, Jayne. Maisie, you that are very close by to Jayne, in Saipan, what are your visions for the future? You know, what needs to happen for that vision to materialize? Can you share a little bit with us?
Sure. It's always amazing to me how similar all the territories are. And I think that speaks a lot to the impact of occupation, you know, as one of the factors. I know that there are many other factors, but I think the impact of, and I'll get to your question, Addie. I just do want to also
Sure, yes.
validate that at least for us, you know, the occupation is an exercise of power. And as Shalane noted earlier, you know, the relationship to that and domestic violence and sexual assault is so clear to all of us that are working in this field. And when our colonizers, oppressors used tactics like violence and rape and sexual assault as a means to gain and maintain that power over our people, that trauma is very much embedded into our bodies, and that's passed down from one generation to the next. So whenever I think about ending domestic violence and sexual assault within my community, it always goes back to that for me, and working on that, healing that trauma. And because we always talk about breaking cycles of abuse, breaking cycles of trauma, we also need to start talking about creating cycles of healing and love, right? There needs to be that simultaneous action to not only stop and prevent the abuse, but also give our people the permission and the empowerment and the tools to remember who we are as a people, to acknowledge the fact that these things were introduced. You know, they are a product and an outcome of all the violence that our people had experienced for generations. And I truly believe that, you know, if we try to connect to that part of us that they attempted to erase or they attempted to silence and to oppress, that we can remember how to connect with each other in a way that does not include violence and trauma and abuse. And we can start to, you know, for generations to come, create where this is not the norm anymore. The truth is, it's very much in the norm. And listening to what Stephanie was saying earlier, it truly almost brought me to tears, because those statistics and that kind of violence happening against women in Puerto Rico, it blows my mind that these are the norm of the way that we are operating in community. And I know in my heart and that is not who we are as people. So trying to connect with that. And I think that's like the larger vision, right, of what we are doing at the coalition. Day-to-day things is really trying to empower victims and survivors, trying to empower the people around them, because oftentimes we put the healing and the courage on the survivor, but we are not thinking about the people who are around them to support them, to come out and to support their courage and to celebrate them when they do come out. So that's also the part of what we're doing, right? Empowering and educating. The education piece is so critical, because that's how we break the mindset, right? That's how we heal. That's how we break the mindset of this sort of internalized oppression that I think is living within us and operating in our community. And then just also trying to meet those day-to-day needs that survivors have. I think my coworker might still be on, but trying to create programs where we're really addressing economic empowerment for both domestic violence and sexual assault survivors, because we know when we provide that freedom, that kind of freedom to victims and survivors, they can make choices that they may not have been able to make before. And those little things can start to really build confidence and empower them to live the life that they are meant to live, without the violence and abuse. So I can keep on talking about all the things, because this is an issue that is very near and dear to my heart, and as well as to everybody who works at the coalition. But it's so heartwarming to be, and I wish we had like a Q&A with all just between us, because I have so many questions about the wonderful work that you all are doing. But thank you again.
And we can open spaces for that. Like definitely we can have a follow-up. Part of the intention is for having these exchanges is for you to get to know each other, and then we can have follow-ups. And Right to Democracy, as Sarah knows, and as you see that she does follow up. She's part of our board of advisors. She does follow-ups in the Pacific, in Guam. And so yeah, we can definitely do that virtual. Is there something good about technology? Is this opportunity to all be together? So I want to pass it now to back to the Caribbean, back home, to my home, Puerto Rico. Stephanie, I want you to be able to touch a little bit more, because you were very able to paint a picture of what is happening here in Puerto Rico. We are the biggest, most populated territory with 3.2 million people living. So the intensity feels huge, and when you see the numbers, it's just it's powerful. And I want you to talk a little bit more about how you see the intersection with colonialism and the visions to the future, the challenges that it entails. So kind of like, close the discussion, and then hopefully be able to answer. We will go to answer a question from the public. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Yes, Adi. In Puerto Rico, colonial rule is not just history. It's a living structure that shaped every layer of violence that we track. And I would like to highlight three intersections that stand out the influence that violence that we experience here. First of all, I have to add that economic precarity born of fiscal colonialism has hollowed Puerto Rico's safety net. Since 2016, we have a fiscal control board that has overseen our budget, slashing social spending, cutting housing and health services, and pushing nearly half women headed household below the poverty level. And we know that without saving housing, steady income, or affordable childcare, too many women are trapped in abusive homes or left unavailable to seek services and justice after violence. Also, the organization that supports survivors have felt the squeeze most of all. Dramatic cuts of their budget means fewer shelters, fewer services centers, translating directly into life lost and family left unprotected. And women and girls first face an uncertain future. There are no coherent policies to shield them, and the state lacks of capacity to respond to the escalated gender violence that I present before. And with every round of austerity, most of victims become trapped in a circle of abuse that is too many cases ending feminicized. And if the government refuses to prioritize women's safety and well-being, it becomes complicit in a systematic violence that costs lives. Definitely, I have to add that we need an immediate structural response and a genuine commitment to survivors' protections and reparation, so no woman ever lost her life because of her gender. And we also need to point out how the easy gun access worsen gender violence, as I mentioned before. And to stop that, we must challenge that culture and push for clear and locally enforced firearm laws. Also, after hurricanes, earthquake, and pandemics, relief funds often arrive too late. and or never reach those who need them, and the gender-based violence rises, and this neglect rooted in our colonial status and deepens in community trauma and weakens the support networks and leaves survivors trapped in a cycle of violence with no clear way out. We understand and see our data and statistics. We see these structural scars everywhere. Seeing our future, we have so many projects that we will love to make it true. First of all, we want to make an interactive real-time dashboard, and we actively seeking funding to build a user-friendly platform so that activists, media, and policymakers can spot emerging trends, information of feminist sites, attend of feminist sites. I think that this dashboard is very important to people had the knowledge and understand violence and mostly feminicides. We also would love to begin firearms impact study. I think that the rise in the percent of use of firearms are very alarming, and I think that we have to continue to analyze that flexibilization of the access of firearms are impact in Puerto Rico. Also, we would love to incorporate intersectional monitoring with racial variables. We know gender violence doesn't impact all the communities equally. And that's why we'll enrich our database by tagging every case with race, ethnicity, immigration status, finally revealing how women and girls of different backgrounds face unique risk and guiding truly equitable and target interventions. So we have a lot of projects. I think that we are very short in time, but these are a few of them.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And I really hope, and this is part what Right to Democracy is trying to do, to visualize the amazing work that you guys are doing, and how these creative solutions are also very relevant to the people in the United States that are tackling these issues too, especially in this point in time where authoritarianism and unilateral decision making is affecting a lot of them, of these groups. So just like visualizing the fact that there needs to be investment in the territories, not only because we need it as territories, but also because of the great solutions and ideas that are fashioned by your work. So let's move really quick, but with intention, with two questions that we have from the public. We have one from Neko Armstrong. How do you see that parental discipline shapes current attitudes toward violence in the home? And how do these legacies contribute to cycles of domestic abuse in your territory? I will have one or two of you address that question. Who wants to go? Maisie? And I think Shalene said. Okay, so Maisie from the Pacific, and then Shalene.
Yeah, thank you for this question. This is something that I have always been interested in, because I grew up in a time where it was very normal for parents to use physical, I guess, discipline to control children and to teach correct behavior. But I never understood how one can use violence to teach correct and right behavior. And I think that it definitely shapes attitudes towards violence because it normalizes it, right? It normalizes the connection between, and oftentimes parents will say, I'm doing this because I love you. And so it normalizes that connection between violence and harm and love and care, right? And so we start to think that that is part of how people show their love is through physical abuse. And so I 100% think that it does contribute to these cycles, and something that we need to address and be more, I guess, vocal about in our education.
Thank you, Jayne and Maisie. Let's go to Shalene.
I agree with Macy. I think that it's been the slave trade just made real for us, especially as African Americans or Afro Caribbean people, anybody that was involved in the slave trade, because it's a power and control tool, which is exactly what the basic of domestic violence is. And it also is the incorporator of silence because they're not giving you a reason why you shouldn't do something. There's never an explanation for it. I was subject to it, so I would know. There's never an explanation to it. It's just you don't do that because you're supposed to do this, but there's never a reason why. And a lot of times it really doesn't make any sense. But because the brainwashing and the do things out of habit and not out of consciousness has been passed down and has been ingrained and has been formatted through the abuse from the colonialism in many, many ways, whether it be through money or through discipline, it all comes out on the other side. So it's like Maisie said, when you're saying that in order for you to receive love, you have to receive pain, it explains to us why we have the problem that we have, right? And when it happens with women, it's even worse. Women and girls, it's even worse because then they start to think that this is normal in a domestic violence situation. And on top of that, what starts to happen is that then they become violent. And they now, because we've seen the trend, it's changed from women being the ones that are going to jail for domestic violence, causing people as the victims to go to jail for domestic violence, to the women fighting back and now going to jail because they're defending themselves. Right. And we spoke about this in our territory quite about 15 years ago. We told them if something doesn't happen and change the system, those children that are being abused and those women that are being abused are going to become the perpetrators because it's working for the perpetrators now. The criminal justice system supports the criminal. It never accounts for the victim or the impact that it's having on the victim. And so that's one of the reasons why we do parenting classes at our coalition, right? We do parenting classes for every victim that comes through because even though they're victims of domestic violence, they may be perpetrators of child abuse because they can't tell the difference. And so we do it so that there's the understand having a conversation should be normal, right? But talking about it, it's like us talking about sex. We don't talk about sex, which is why nobody talks about sexual assault, right? But if we start to attack it from that perspective, open up conversation, have people become comfortable with having uncomfortable conversations, get out of the idea of anything being taboo that is human, then I think we will move a lot further.
Thank you so much, Shalene. I have two questions from Sarah, but I think we answered, touched upon the one about the woman in prison pipeline that is being created because of this circle of violence. But Jayne, I want to let you ask your answer or ask the question. You have your hands up, but also at the same time answer the second question that Sarah posed, which is, do the panelists feel we have research of women in violence in the territories, especially Micronesia? I would say also, because I'm going to let you, Jennifer, also answer that, Polynesia. So for the public, Guam and Northern Marianas are considered Micronesia, which is kind of this term that was used. And then Polynesia is Hawaii, and Samoa, and you have Tonga, and you have others. So there's like this division that was created by the Western world of that world over there. And so what research needs to happen? So I want Jayne to answer, and then Jennifer, and then we close.
Well, with regard to Guam, and Maisie can speak to this in CNMI. One of the things that we do to get our grants, when we get our discretionary grants from our Office of Violence Against Women, is we take the statistics that are provided to us from GPD, which our Guam Police Department, with regard to domestic violence and criminal sexual conduct. But we know that globally, sexual assault is the most underreported crime on the planet. So whatever is being reported is just skimming the surface of what is really happening. So to answer Sarah's question, there's not a lot of research done unless we get the University of Guam students to do a project or something. And the data that we collect for our grants is data that we gather from the nonprofits. How many victims do you see a month? How many victims do you help? What services do they have with regard to the legal services or the counseling services or any other services that from our rape crisis center. So that's how we gather our data. There's no one agency that gathers data. It's all these little agencies, and we put together grants from that data. But I wanted to touch a little bit on the parental discipline aspect. And in Chamorro, there's a term "gai respetu," which means have respect. And we're seeing a lot of, especially the elders, saying that the young people don't have respect anymore for their elders and for what their elders bring to the table, or the disciplinary aspects of the respect. And I think that, again, with regard to what Shalene said about the social media, that's an aspect that we have to look at, is that young people feel empowered by the social media. One of the things that we are doing with Bureau of Women's Affairs is we produced a PSA, and I'll put the link in the chat. And it's a real easy PSA to produce, and it's called "Don't Be That Guy." I actually got the idea from a PSA that was in Northern Europe, and it's men talking about attitudes and activities that preclude sexual assault. Like, in the Chamorro culture, or in Micronesia, if a young male wants to, pay attention to a woman, or comment on what she's saying, he does this sound where they go, "Tss, tss," and it's, did you ever do that to a girl? Do you ever ask a girl out and expect something from her? Do you ever get a girl drunk and have your way with her? Do you ever tell a young girl, "Don't tell anyone, or we will, we'll both get in trouble"? So it's all of these attitudes that these men have, and it's men on the screen saying these attitudes. And then someone saying, "Sexual violence starts long before you think it does. Don't be that guy." And these are attitudes that we need to tell all of our community to be aware of. For example, we had the Archdiocese of Agana had a Faith Matters conference, and I spoke at it, and I said, what we need for you to do as a pastor, or as people who have influence, is tell your people that come to your church, your constituents, to be better men, to be men that set good examples for young boys. Not, how do you treat your wife? How do you treat the women in your family? Do you beat on them? Do you disrespect them? Because those attitudes travel down to young men and young people, and the young men think it's okay, and the young women think it's okay, that behavior is acceptable. So it's those types of things that we need to combat.
Definitely, Jayne. And thank you so much for sharing that. We're at time, but I really wanted to give an opportunity for Jennifer to speak a little bit more about research in her area. We're just like very blessed to have el Observatorio de Género in Puerto Rico as a research think tank on these issues, and it is a blessing to be able to have it so we can like then act. But I know that is more of a challenge over there.
Yeah, I have to say that the collection of information is a challenge in our way that we collect information, and the changes of the people who collect the data. We live on this island that people come and go, and there's not a real understanding of the importance of the data that's collected. We do have a public health data that's done every couple years, and so that counts how many people are admitted into the hospital, how many births, how many people are living on island. But when it comes to like some real conversations about what domestic violence looks like, it comes out from the police report as to who presented or who came to the police, right? Or not necessarily what was at the hospital, or nobody's really reporting like how many assaults, or they do say assaults, but they don't divide it into sexual assault or domestic violence assault. It could be any assault, right? So the collection of data here in American Samoa is extremely challenging, I should say. We do have a format of it, but it's very challenging. So when we go to present on what it is, we use a lot of the conversations that are held on our other island, and we talk about 3 out of 5 women. So there's that's a little bit difficult in the way and the manner that a Pacific Islander looks at what data is and the importance of it. And so, and using it in a social structure that governments and funders need, when you come into our space, that's not how we count. We know who's there. We know our stories of our people, but to do it in a Western practice is very difficult.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And you know, we could keep talking so much, and I'm gonna make sure to provide spaces for you to reconnect and talk more whenever you guys want, whenever you women want. It's just the phrase "you guys" is always like shocking to me, especially when we're all women. Uh, especially when you girls want. I think, like, to sum up and to close the conversation, we have all talked a lot about how there's this like huge need for all the territories to understand history of occupation and colonialism in order to be able to identify those intersections between our past histories and our current events, our current realities in the territories, and that there's like a need to rebuild our cultures, or rescue values that were the good values, you know, because we can. It's not that we want to say like all values were perfect before something X or Y happened, but there were some community values and some values of our of the way we related among each other and even with nature and with our world that need to be rescued by understanding that intersection, and then from there to be able to redefine our reality with that perspective, redefine democracy in the terms that works for us. And to do that, we have to bring community to the equation. Like, community has to be integrated in this process of acting against violence and solving the issues that keep arising in our communities. And because we need a social response, that stems from this cultural process, but also that meets everyday needs of people that are locked in these cycles of violence. So that was kind of like the notes I was able to take. There's a lot more that was said. We are very grateful for the panelists and for our wonderful attendants that have been connected with us for more than 1.5 hours. And we have, this is recorded, so it's going to be shared in our webpage, and hope that we can create more spaces to speak. Please be in the lookout for future virtual dialogues, and connect with us in our webpage and receiving our newsletter, so that you're able to see other activities and events that we do, and that you can engage with us. So thank you so much. Blessings, everybody. And again, thank you. Gracias.
Sure.
I
Did
forgot
you
how you say.
everyone?
Sis Mase. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.